Hi, my name is Paul Keough, and you're listening to Catholic versus Catholic.
If you would, please just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you believe, and how you came to believe what you believe.
Sure. So I'm the ninth of 13 children from a family in upstate New York with a agnostic father and a Catholic mother. And so the result of that is that right now I'm Catholic, and 5 of my siblings in total are Catholic. I don't actually know really fully the status of my other siblings. I think half of the remaining are Protestant or just believe that a God exists, and then there are at least 3 or 4 who are atheist or agnostic, as far as I can tell. And so part of what I learned from all that is that the beliefs of your parents are going to affect what you believe. Because I look at the mix of my brothers and sisters and what they believe. It's a mix of what their parents believed. So now I feel a duty to try to evangelize my own siblings and others, because I think Christ expects that of us. And I've debated many people, especially my own siblings. They will often tell me, well, don't you want to be liked? And I say, I don't believe the purpose of our lives is to be liked. I believe the purpose of our lives was stated by Jesus Christ when he said he had come into the world to witness truth. So if he's come into the world, and he is truth, to witness truth, then we also, as his follower, will have to make our attempt to being a witness to truth. So the hardest part is when people's worldview is so far from mine that we can't agree. So, for example, I had an atheist say to me, well, now we agree on something, so our views aren't that different. And the temptation in our culture, at least here in America, is to agree with someone and say, oh, yeah, you're right, our views are almost the same. But I did not. I said, well, in this one thing, our views are similar, but our worldview could not be more different. You believe there is no God, and I believe there is a God. And that's about as different as you can get. And it's hard because, many, at least liberal thinkers, and I would just say secular thinkers where I live, if you don't agree, you're considered a difficult person or a problem person or something like that, I guess. And I just don't believe that's the purpose of my life. I don't believe the purpose of my life is just to agree with people so that somebody's happy. I think the purpose of life is to witness truth. So if that's the purpose of life, we're not going to make friends with everyone that we meet, no matter how hard we try. And I even concluded that when I was an atheist. So I was an atheist from 16 until 28, so 12 years of my life, those most miserable years of my life. I was an atheist, which I think the misery relates to being an atheist, but my atheist friends don't agree. But I even concluded when I was an atheist that the purpose of life was to witness truth. I just thought truth was something that it was not at all. And so I was barking up the wrong tree. I was selling a bad bag of goods, but one thing that really fascinated me in Dante's Inferno was when Virgil went to the first plane of hell, there were a lot of people that Dante never expected to see in hell, like philosophers and scientists and great thinkers. And so he turned to Virgil and said, well, why are these people in hell? It doesn't make any sense. These are great thinkers. And what he said really struck me, what Virgil says in Dante's Inferno. He says, the limit of human reason is the first plane of hell. And I thought, wow, the limit of human reason is still hell. It's still hell. It's still the place you don't want to go, right? And so if it exists, nobody wants to go there. They're just denying its existence, right? If they knew it existed, they wouldn't want to be there. But so that just amazed me. I realized, wow, so if the greatest thinkers in time, thinking on their own, not through the grace of God and not, through the Holy Spirit, but on their own, the greatest they can do is the first plane of hell. We can't do it without God. It's impossible, basically, without God. And so even as a scientist and even as an atheist, now I didn't conclude that God existed when I was an atheist, but what I concluded when I was an atheist was that the purpose of life had to be truth, and the reason to pursue truth, and the reason I came to that conclusion was that I quickly realized as a young adult that you could not make everyone like you. It was impossible. You can't, because there's always going to be people who disagree with you, always. And it doesn't matter what position you take. There's someone of the opposite position. Certainly see that on blogs today, on the internet. It doesn't matter what position you take. I mean, what's worse today is that it doesn't matter what position you take today. you can find so-called evidence out there somewhere on the internet, even though the sourcing can be really poor. So I think that makes it even more confusing. That's made it easier for the devil to mess with people's minds, right? Because there's all this fake data on the internet. So if people don't know what's a good source of data versus a poor source of data, they can believe all kinds of crazy things, So, and point to anything they want as evidence. So the conclusion I came to, even as an atheist, was that the purpose of life was to pursue truth, and it was kind of Machiavellian at that point. And I said to myself, and the reason is because you can't get everybody to agree with you no matter what you do, so you might as well pursue truth. And that's the conclusion I came to as an atheist. So, I guess one thing I would say about having been an atheist is that there were atheists that at that time I respected, and to a certain extent I respected what they were trying to do. They just, again, were selling a bad bag of goods, but I respected what they were attempting. So I respected what they were trying to accomplish. And I think that, as a Catholic now, I believe there's a little bit of truth everywhere because God is everywhere. Therefore, there's a little bit of truth everywhere. And even when I looked at atheist groups, agnostic groups, humanism, motorcycle gangs, gangs, there's a sense of a desire to be together, a sense of communion, right? We want communion. We're a social animal. We want to be together. We want to be with other humans, right? So, so these desires, of course, once you understand God, you realize these were put in our heart. These were put upon our heart, written upon our souls. That these are just natural human desires. It's not just that we're a social animal, right? If we were just a social animal, that doesn't even explain how the fraternal behavior of people in gangs. There's something else going on. So there just doesn't seem to be enough. And I remember I studied science. I studied biological. So there was a lot of people talking when I was getting my doctorate about humanism and humans as animals. But even that didn't explain a lot of human behavior. We seem to act different than other animals. So there was something else going on. Even scientists were acknowledging that. Something else is going on with humans. And if truth is written upon our heart, that's one explanation, right? And that's the explanation I eventually came to. And I also think as someone who I was such an advocate of pursuit of the truth, that it really matters to me. Pursuit of the truth is probably the most important thing in my life. It's probably the overlying theme of my human life, my personality, my life, is the pursuit of truth. And since the pursuit of truth is so important, and if God exists, He's everywhere. So anywhere you look, if you look hard enough and deep enough, you're going to come to God, unless you just resist it the whole way, right? I don't believe that, I don't believe that, I don't believe that. You'd have to deny your own path. So once I became realized that my personality is the person who must have truth, must seek truth, although I think that's written on all our hearts. It was the overriding theme of my life. Once I realized that's who I am, then I pursued truth. So, I didn't want to be a Catholic or an agnostic because my parents fought. I didn't want to be a Protestant because Protestants tried to trick me when I was a kid. You'll have to see the EWTN show to see an example of that. But many times I was tricked and belittled by Protestants where I grew up, so I didn't want to be a Protestant. So when I went to college, I still wanted something greater than just myself. When I looked at my dad, I thought the purpose of life is just selfishness. He decided to date a young, attractive nurse, and so he left my middle-aged mom for a young, attractive nurse. Well, just the pursuit of pleasure, right? The pursuit of selfishness. But when I got to college, I thought of higher things. I thought, well, I'm here at higher education. I'm thinking of higher things. What are some higher things? And one was, is there higher purpose? Is there higher meaning to life? So I took a course called A Study of the 7 Great Religions of the World. So for whatever reason, they looked at religions of the world. They categorized how many believers, regardless of over a period of time, right? Just the total number of believers in any particular religion, and they ranked them, and they picked the top 7, and it was like a great books course in college. And there it was at a public university, and they're doing this great books course. So I did that, and the order started from Eastern religions and ended up with Western religions. And my thought as a 17-year-old at that time, I went to college at 17. I had just turned 17 when I went to college. And this was one of the first courses I took because I was fascinated by it. I guess I could back up. In high school, I did a comparison of the Quran and the Bible out of an interest in it. It's just to study it. I was already an atheist. So my senior year, I compared the two. But then I took this great religions course, and my assumption was the reason they started from Eastern religions and ended in Western religions was because the writers were Western. You know what I mean? But the fact that Christianity was the last one in the book, I just thought was a chronological thing of the writer's preferences. For all I cared, it could have been random. You know what I mean? They could have just presented them randomly. But something happened when I took the course. I took the course, and they started by talking about religions in ancient times. The religions of the petty, I guess, is what they sort of labeled it as, which was, the petty Greek gods, the petty Viking gods. You know what I mean? They act like humans in a soap opera, and they're just basically petty humans with powers, right? So they talked about that, and they talked about gods of primitives, where so-called primitives, the native peoples. Those religions were often related to what they did for a living. So if they hunted, there was the god of hunting. If they had to go to war, there was the god of war. If they had to fertilize the crops, there was the god of fertility, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So it's sort of a rationalist approach to religion when they started. And then they get to the 7 great religions finally, and they say, well, a certain number of people followed these, they called it world views. So we're going to, obviously they meant religions, because the things they list are all religions, and there were some borderline ones they talk about too before they got to the 7 great religions, like Zoroastrianism, Shintoism, which are they're very small factions and didn't last very long, and there weren't enough people following it for them to decide to categorize it as one of the 7 great world religions. But they mention them because they said they were kind of like a transition, religion or something where now the gods, you can pray to them, and not only that, but they'll bestow upon you gifts, so to speak, or punishments. Because the original set of gods, the selfish gods, only punished. So now there's this new level where they also give gifts or something. I don't know. It seemed like malarkey to me, but that's that. They said those were the transitions to these 7 great religions. Then they finally get to the 7 great religions, and the first 3 I think are Confucianism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. I think they threw Taoism in again, but they said it was borderline, not a religion or something, due to the number of participants, which to me didn't make sense. I don't think something's qualified as a religion because one person believes it or a million people believe it. But they kind of stated that these were more philosophies than religion, even though they were saying they're religions. What they claim to mean by that is that they were a way of life. Confucianism, I think really kind of embodies that. It's just a way of life, right? You're going to live this way, and this is better. You'll have a better life. Practical, simple, day-to-day, kind of living. And then you get a little more, in terms of how they positioned it anyway. I don't know if they're right or wrong. I've never practiced those religions, but this is how they positioned it anyway, the book, and the professor, which was high and lofty and probably dead wrong. But, this is what they were saying. And then when they get to Buddhism and Hinduism, they say, well, here they're a philosophy of how to live, but also an expectation of what will come next. So there's another level, right? Although you could argue that for even Viking gods, where you want to go to Valhalla, right? It's not perfect the way they're describing it, but you see what's going on is they're going from one level to the next, implying that these are higher religions than the previous set. And then they get to the Western religions, and of course it all starts in Israel. Starts in Israel, the Jews, and then Christianity, which they don't call Catholicism in the book, but for 700 years the only Christians were Catholics. I hate for Protestants to miss that, but I'm a fellow at Acton Institute in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So the Acton Institute is a center for ecumenical religious studies, and they have a really good study on what happens to faculty at Protestant seminaries who study the history of their church. Well, they convert and they leave, and they have to hire new people. Well, isn't that telling them something? So anyway, so we know that the first several hundred years, the only Christians were Catholics, and then the others just were modifications of that. And the Muslim religion, while trying to claim to predate the Bible, is a modification of the Bible, in my opinion, having studied both texts and compared them. Even like Mormonism, in a way, John Smith, the American who just ripped out chapters of the Bible, and the Protestants did that too. Calvin and Luther, they just ripped out parts they didn't like. Well, I don't like this, and I don't like that, so... and the famous one, of course, is the King of England, who wanted to have multiple wives, and the Pope told him he couldn't, so he decided, this is my new religion. I behead anybody who doesn't agree with me. So, and I suppose the Russian czars did that too when they got rid of Catholicism. So, then it finally comes to Christianity. The end of the book is Christianity. And there's some maritime Christian concepts and Judeo-Christian concepts. First, the Jewish concept of one God, one God. And so instead of these petty gods that are fighting each other or living out a soap opera in the clouds or something, in Valhalla or whatever it is, that now there's a single God, an all-powerful, all-knowing, omnipresent God that there is no equal to or no challenger to, not in any real way, right? The devil, while Lucifer was the highest angel until he fell, I don't think he's the highest angel anymore. Michael, the humble, became the highest angel instead. He's not an equal of God because he's an angel and God is God. So there was never this sense in the Jewish faith that there was any real challenger to God. There's no one who's going to get in a wrestling match with God. I know there's a wrestling match with God in the Old Testament. What I mean is there's no one who could challenge his position and take over his throne. But in other religions, there were. I mean, with the Viking religions and the Greek religions and the Roman gods, that was a real threat. So this is it's a different game. I mean, this is a different game. And it seemed like, in looking at Judaism, there were more scientific, if I'm allowed to say that, because science comes from philosophy, which comes from metaphysics, which comes from theology. There was more scientific approach to the universe. How the universe was created wasn't a turtle on the back of a frog on top, whatever. It wasn't some crazy idea that a kid could think up in the clay, in the sand. It was much more organized and seemed very intelligent, which surprised me because you see these other religions and things they didn't even call religions in the book, right? The so-called primitive fears, they called it in some parts, but they seemed to me like something man could have made up. Like I read a play about this man who wants to steal his friend's wife because she's pretty, right? And the other guy wants to steal his money and steal his cattle, right? I mean, it sounds like a person made that up. When I looked at Judaism, I was surprised. There was a level of intellect there that surprised me. And then I came to Christianity, and despite the fact that the professor he seemed like an atheist, I found something very different about Christianity in comparison to any other religion or philosophy or way of life. And that difference was that the God they described, which was the Son of God, or really the Son of Man, Jesus, behaved in a way that I could not explain. I could not see man making it up. I couldn't see it. It didn't make any sense. God's going to become man so he can be tortured and killed so man can be freed to go to heaven to be with his Father. I thought, wow, that's alien. I came to a conclusion in my head, either because Jesus, I learned, was the most documented figure in history. And at that time, documents weren't, you took a picture of somebody and scanned the image. It was other people doing writings and drawings and other things that are historical documents. The best documented figure in history is Jesus Christ. Even more than Caesar, even more than Egyptian pharaohs, even more than czars. He's the most documented figure, meaning the most number of people wrote things about him, again, which said to me, there's something really different about this Jesus. Something is strange here. And I could not explain his behavior. And I kind of came to the conclusion his behavior was alien, not human. It was not human. And so I thought there's only three things that can be true. The documents we're assuming are true. All these people are saying they saw him. All these people are saying he did these things. Even his enemies are saying he did these things, right? Not just his friends. So there's all these factions and groups of different interests saying he existed, he did these things, okay? And I believed there were really only three things you could conclude of Jesus. Either he's nuts, right? He belongs in an insane asylum, or he's a liar, or he's telling the truth. That's all I could think of. It's got to be one of those three. So I examined the three, which is very dangerous for an atheist to do. There's no evidence he's insane. Nothing. If you look at any of his documents or anything anyone talked about him, no one said he was insane. None of his statements contradict any other of his other statements. I mean, if somebody's insane, you can usually find some pattern of irregularity in their statements. Something. You can point out something. Otherwise, you wouldn't call them insane. You'd just say they're a little odd, right? So, was he a liar? Well, again, there's nothing that he said that was contradicted by anything else that he said or anything else that he did. He even predicted things that seemed impossible to predict, and he was right every time. Well, that's absurd. Either he's a really good guesser, a really good liar, right, or he's telling the truth. And so then there's the possibility of he's telling the truth. Well, it's very hard to handle, especially if you're an atheist and you come from a broken family and you've got a broken household and you're poor and you don't see joy or love in your life. It's pretty hard to come to the conclusion that he's telling the truth. It's very difficult, I think, for anyone. It's the greatest challenge in our lives is to accept God for what he is, accept Jesus for what he is, accept the Trinity for what they are. And it's one God in three persons. It's the ultimate battle. It's the ultimate battle of humanity, is to accept that he told the truth. Now, the post-mortem evidence, too, after he died, shocked me. Let me give you an example. If you think of like a gang or a motorcycle gang, my father rode motorcycle after he left my mother, so I just became fascinated by gangs and motorcycle gangs to try to get to know my father, if you know what I mean. So if you think of a gang, and let's say a gang robbed a bank, and then they caught 2 of the 5 guys who robbed the bank, what are the other 3 afraid of? They're going to snitch. And the pressure to snitch is huge, right? There's called the prisoner's dilemma. If you're given 2 choices, neither party will pick the best choice, and Nash determined that too, the mathematician. So you can't win, basically. You can't win, and police are good at this. So who were the police at the time of Christ? The Romans were the police. So were the Sanhedrin. They policed their own people. So you have 2 sets of police, okay? So 12 people separated, eventually tortured. Wouldn't one of them snitched if this were fake? Any gang will tell you they would have. They should have. Right. Now, for the sake of the Jewish faith, which I'm not anti-Semitic, because this is going to sound anti-Semitic, but I am not. I'm trying to make that clear, okay? But if the Sanhedrin could have proved that Jesus were not the Son of God, wouldn't they have done that? Wouldn't they have revealed something if they could have found it, like he didn't rise, so here we found the body? They didn't do it. They never did it. The Romans, wouldn't they have liked to prove he's not God? Because this Christian faith was like a real hassle for them. They were unable to do it. They couldn't find the body. So the big police, the little police, and his followers, none of them could find the body. So maybe what he's telling is the truth, even post-mortem, even after his death. There's no body. No one ever found a body in 2,000 years? Another one, Mary, she was assumed into heaven. No body. Show me the bones of Mary. That's physical evidence, right? Archaeology, anthropology. Where are the bones? There's no bones. We've got bones of saints all over the place, right? We've chopped up their bodies and put them in all kinds of vessels, and they're reliquaries. We honor them because we know that they're in heaven with God, and miracles happen because they become holy bodies. Even chopped up, doesn't matter. Even all over the world, doesn't matter. So even after they die, the evidence is overwhelming that what he said was true. So if what he said is true, so here's the real problem. Here's where the rub comes. There's a period where, like an atheist like me who converted, and I've seen agnostics go through the same thing too, where you start to realize that this Christ was telling the truth and what he said really happened. Here's the problem. Here's the rub, right? If what he said is true and those things happened, I have to change my life now. That's the real rub. Even Augustine struggled with that. Even Paul said, I want to do this, but I do that instead. I mean, these two are very, very strong. And even they realized their body was weak. The original sin had a great power over them. And the devil and the demons were always whispering in their ear. So I do what I do not wish to do. I say what I do not mean to say. Now, if you don't act, now you don't have an excuse. Especially someone like me, I'm a passionate pursuer of truth. So once I saw it was true, I had to do something. I had to do something. I think that the exploration of other religions, philosophies, and worldviews is actually very important. And I think for those like me, I didn't get to go to Catholic school. There was poor formation in upstate New York. I had to do it as an adult. And the word university means unity and diversity. University. The purpose of higher education, Thomas Aquinas said this, is to ask questions. I mean, people call me a doctor of questions. I have a doctorate, and I ask a lot of questions. I drive some people nuts. I have so many questions. I can't help it. It's my nature. And I think all of us need to ask questions. And I think sometimes the fear might be, well, we shouldn't ask questions and we shouldn't pursue things. Why not? If God is behind the universe, if God is behind everything, seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. So I had to do it as an adult, basically. I had to ask all the questions of others and myself that St. Thomas Aquinas did so beautifully, in his works, and could have been learned in a Catholic school, in good formation. I had to do it on my own. So God knows what we face, right? God knows. I always get these questions from atheists, the top questions I get are things like this. Well, there's evil in the world, and God knows that, and he allows it. Therefore, God is evil. I'm like, wait a minute. Your logic, it sounds logical, but it's not. You're missing a concept called free will. You're missing the understanding of original sin, which originated with us, not him, and his love for us being so great that he allows us even to choose not him. And so they don't understand the evil in the world is the consequence of sin, not God. It's not God that's causing evil in the world. Okay, so that's a real common one I'll get from the atheists, and there's others similar to that. There's real common questions I'll get, and what I often realize in those questions is they haven't done a very good job of exploring. So I think Scott Hahn says this, and I think it's a beautiful, and I'll probably mess it up, but I'll do my best. He says, I've met a lot of people who are not Catholic for what the Catholic Church is not, but I have yet to meet anyone who is not a Catholic for what the Church is. In other words, most of the time, what I find when I have conversations with atheists, agnostics, which I focus on because I went through a period like that, because I know what they're going through to a certain extent in my own experiences, is have you really dug deep enough? Your question sounds great, or the logic you've created, the logic trap you've created in your head, you're going around and around to defend your position. What if it's wrong? What if you're misunderstanding the steps? The devil's whispering in your ear, yeah, that's it, you got it, yeah. Another one I tell atheists, another trick that people will get wrong, they don't understand it. One of the first tricks the devil does to people is convince them that he does not exist. Because if he does not exist, and God does not exist, there's no consequences of your actions, at least not in an internal way, only in a physical way, or whatever happens materially in front of you, or emotional way. So he doesn't want people to think he exists. So and then he can work on them. Once they don't think he exists, now they just open the door for him to come in and mess with him. And when I have people say, well, even if there's a devil, I'm not afraid of him, I'll say, look, this is what the devil wants. And I think it was Archbishop Fulton Sheen said this, I think. What the devil wants is me dead, in an alley, in a dumpster, looking up at the sky with dull eyes and slit wrists and a bunch of holes in my arms from drug abuse. Right. So he wants us dead in his grip. That's what he wants. If that doesn't scare someone, there's something wrong with them. Who wants to be in that position? No one. But do you think he's going to come up to you and say, hey, follow me, I'll kill you and dump you in a dumpster? No, he's going to lie. He's the father of lies, so he lies. And we start believing the lies because we like the lies. We like sin. The problem with sin is that we like it. If we didn't like it, we wouldn't have a problem. We would not be tempted, but because we like it. We want to be masters of our own destiny. So anyway, when I got to graduate school, I felt a calling to community, right? I studied social biology. Social biology, you look at how rats work together, ants work together, wolves, apes, right? So man is a social animal, and that's supposed to explain all of his behavior, but it doesn't. So I thought, what could explain these behaviors of man that are not explained because the animals don't do it, only men do it? Like a man running into a house to save children that are not his biological children. The children get out, but he dies. He did not marry and have any kids. Well, genetically, didn't he just destroy his own seed? So why do you do that? Animals don't do it. So there's some things we do that animals don't do. And I thought, what is that? So there I was in graduate school studying science. So I went to the library and I thought, can I find something that explains some of the higher things of man? And he's still an animal, because that's what I wanted him to be, so I could sin. But he has these higher things. And I found something called humanism. Humans, in acting in their own best interests, act in the best interests of society, and they stole it from Thomas Jefferson, the invisible hand. So anyway, this was one where, and I thought to myself, wow, even by accident, man can do good. Of course, I also realized the problem with the philosophy was that even by accident, man can do bad. And then I thought, why am I talking about good and bad? Why do I keep coming back to good and bad? What's that, right? Isn't it just a matter of our own interests? And that's what humanism said. And so I started to see the weakness in humanism, too, that they couldn't really explain what is in our best interests. And this is even a problem I see with the Golden Rule. It's not in the Bible, but Protestants swear by it. So when I was in business school, I was taking an business ethics class. Talk about an oxymoron, business ethics. And the professor was from Notre Dame, and he was a Protestant who was a Catholic who converted to some Protestant faith. I forget which one. And he said the Golden Rule. He said the Golden Rule in the class, and I said, I have an issue with the Golden Rule. He said, what's wrong with the golden rule? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I said, what if I'm warped? What if I'm into masochism and sadism? What if I'm into hurting myself? What if I'm insane? So I want to do unto others, well, I want to be hurt, so I want to hurt other people. And he's like, what? And he really was puzzled by me, and he said, you're the one student I've ever taught that I most regretted giving an A to. So here I was still growing, right? I was still developing, and I was starting to reject humanism. And there was something he said in one of the classes that became a battle between him and I. And it took me a while to figure out how to get around his scenario. Because ultimately, I did start to realize that there were kind of two camps in good and bad. Either good and bad don't mean anything, or they just mean what you want it to mean, relativism, or good and bad are actually definable, absolutism, right? It's one or the other. So he wanted to defend relativism. It was strange. In the class, he would say, well, you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that, but then someone would say, what about this? Oh, yeah, I guess that's okay. So it just seemed to me there were no rules, really, because there was an exception to every exception to every exception. So ultimately chaos. So he gave an example to defend this so-called good, bad, whatever you want it to be, definition of reality. He said, okay, so one time I was with my family. This is very personal for him. There's no intention to harm him in explaining his example, because this is what he said publicly. He said, my grandmother was dying, and we were in the hospital room with her, and she really loved Christmas, and it was only like Thanksgiving or something. And they knew she really loved Christmas. Well, the doctor was in the room, and she said to the doctor, will I live to see Christmas? And according to the professor, the doctor knew she would not. They found out in the hall later that she would not, and she died maybe a week later. And the doctor said yes. And everyone sighed in the room because they knew how important it was to Grandma to live till Christmas. So he said that white lie was a good white lie. Now, it took me a little while to figure out what was wrong. It really bothered me. I thought there's something wrong, and I can't quite see what it is. Okay, now, by this time, I was already converting to be a Catholic, okay? So I finally figured it out. And I went to his office. I said, I think I see the problem with your dilemma, why you're defending a white lie, when in an absolute system, no lie is a good lie, right? Because all lies would be a form of sin and therefore have consequences that are detrimental somehow, even if we can't see it right away or point to it immediately. And he said, what is it? What is it that you're thinking that would solve this? I said, the doctor did not lie. He says, what do you mean? I said, well, if we die and there is an afterlife, she's still alive. And she's more alive than anything we can understand. He was like, huh? But I reflect this on myself instead of him. This was me trying to figure out, are there rules to the universe or not? Is the universe random and chaotic, man, a pile of chemicals, which I would hear in science sometimes, or are there rules? And behind it, is there an entity? Is there something that cares out there that made all this happen and is looking out for us? And that's God. And so it's got to be one or the other, in my opinion, because when I talked to Nobel laureates, and there were several at Northwestern, and I got to meet others at other universities because we were a top science program. So it was very nice. I got to mingle with Harvard and Stanford and Cambridge and all the top faculty from all over the place. And Nobel laureates, what surprised me is a number of them were religious. And when I would press upon why, they would say, well, I've looked at, and then whatever it is. If it's a physicist, I've looked at the laws of motion. If it's an astronomer, an astrologist, or whatever, astronomer, I've looked at the universe. If it's a biochemist, I've looked at the molecule, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Quantum mechanics, I've looked at the basis of matter, right? And pretty much what they would say to me at some point, in some kind of evidence, that there is complexities beyond complexities that could not be explained by any randomness. And even the quantum mechanics guys who say, there's random movement of the subatomic particles, say it's still arranged almost like an orchestra overall. So there's this order within order within order. The one that maybe impressed me the most was a Jewish physicist who looked at all the constants of the universe and came to the conclusion that the slightest move in any of these constants, which have huge ranges that they could be, and there's many of these constants, the slightest move of any of them, no life could exist in the universe. So the probability that all these constants would be exactly where they are on these huge scales, scales in the 10 to 30 kind of range, ridiculously huge scales, is infinitesimally small to the point of zero, or it's been random. And you could go on and on with these type of examples. But here's what fascinated me. people who were pursuing truth in science, which is supposed to be the anti-religion area, which it's not, in my opinion, at all. Okay, it's just people seeking truth in some aspect of the universe. The best minds come to the conclusion something started all this, something intelligent. Some people call it intelligent design, creationism, both. Some don't know what to call it, but randomness just doesn't seem to cut it. Not even in biology. There's people talk about evolution all the time, and therefore there can't be a God. There's really nothing in evolution that contradicts teachings of the Catholic Church in any way. God didn't. What's a day to God could be a billion years to us. We don't know what's meant by day. Okay, it could be poetry. In Genesis, and there are huge leaps in like the Cambrian explosion, where we go from single-cell organisms to all the body forms in a very short period of time that evolution doesn't seem to understand, or no one can seem to figure out how it happened. It used to be they said it was 100 million years, then they said, oh my gosh, it's down to 30 million years, oh my gosh, it's only 10 million years. We went from bacteria to all the body forms. That's not the time span needed for that to have occurred. And I know I'll get people yelling at me for saying this because I was in a science field, but it just isn't. No one has an explanation for that. And so the best scientific minds, when they dig deep enough, and I believe that's true of any field, the artist who digs deep enough, the musician who digs deep enough, the person looking at beautiful landscapes, who looks at landscapes in great detail enough, the person who studies birds, I don't really think it matters. In other words, it matters in the sense it's beautiful, whatever God gave, whatever strengths he gave us and areas he has us pursued. I don't think it matters which area we look in. The evidence for God is there because he's behind all of it. So no matter where we look or what field we go into, the best minds seem to find that there's something behind it. Now, that doesn't guarantee that the best minds are going to become Christians, because I always think back to the first plane in hell. See, I'm trying to go in a circle now. Back to where I started, that first plane in hell. In the end, people still will decide, I love God or I love myself. They're going to decide one or the other, and God loves them so much, he's going to give them what they wanted. The people in hell want to be in hell. The people in purgatory want to be in heaven. And they're choosing what they wanted. Either I want what I want, despite the evidence I saw for a real truth with a capital T, or I've decided that this God is greater than me, despite my skills, abilities, strengths, all that stuff, and that I want to be the least in his kingdom rather than the greatest in the other, to reverse the statement of Satan. So I would rather be the guy cleaning God's fingernails and working on his cuticles than the prince of darkness or something. So I love God first, and so that's the hardest part of all. And the doubting Thomas, there's a doubting Thomas in all of us. Some it's more than others. There's atheists. I'll say to them, finally, I'll say, we could debate forever. I can only do so much anyway. All I can do is plant seeds. The Holy Spirit and the mystery has to take over, and it does. But they'll want to debate me and debate me and debate me. I'll throw them research papers. They'll throw me research papers. We go back and back and back. I'll say to them, we can go on forever, and the evidence will never satisfy you. Remember that what the Christ said to Thomas, you had to put your hand in my side. Blessed are those who never saw me and believed. So you could be given evidence indefinitely and still choose yourself over God. So at some point, that's what faith is. It's a leap. Faith is a leap. We finally realize in our heart, right? Christ didn't come for the mind. He came for the heart. The mind can't do it. Look at the first plane of hell. Brilliant minds. They couldn't make the leap. The brilliant mind itself isn't enough. The heart has to be one. And so, even when I think of my moment of conversion, if you watch the WTN Journey Home episode, you'll see that I couldn't understand my moment of conversion. It's a mystery. So I believe a lot of people were praying, and the Holy Spirit worked on me. And he will do that for anyone if they will just knock, if they will ask. And to go back to Thomas Aquinas and the founding of the university, and the purpose of the university was to seek, to ask questions and to seek. And I feel that universities have become so politically correct now that it's getting harder and harder for people to really do real research. It is ask questions, challenge concepts. Thomas Aquinas was so brilliant, even though they called him the dumb ox because he was slow when he was young. He was so brilliant that in the end, the only person he could find to ask him tough questions was himself. That each of us can seek in our own way and find God. He's not going to ignore anyone. If someone were an Aboriginal and had no sign of God in their life, he's going to bring them signs. And it's between God and the person. Only God and that person know that those signs were there and have their own personal revelation that God will bring them to him if they'll choose to love God first. So in the end, it still comes down to our will. And that's what I care about, really, is have I helped atheists and agnostics find God? Because I feel blessed I was able to find God.
At the end of all my episodes, I always ask my guests to wrap up the show with a little positive thought. So what do you think you might be able to say to anyone that might be out there listening now?
Sure. So when I was an atheist, I was exhausted. It really was. My book's coming out in February, which is it's a Canadian publisher, by the way, Canadian editor and a Canadian publisher. It's going to be Into Glorious Light. And it says, From Exhausted Atheist to Joyful Catholic. That's the subtitle. Into Glorious Light. And I was exhausted. And part of the reason I was exhausted was I was trying to make everybody happy, which is impossible. Remember, I figured out even as an atheist, you can't make everybody happy. Because when you say one thing, someone's going to have the opposite opinion. It doesn't matter what opinion you take. And if you go in the middle and you're lukewarm, the people at both ends now hate you. So you simply can't please everyone. So stop trying. Second is, look at your life. If you're an atheist or an agnostic, look at your life. Is it really full of joy? Mine wasn't. It was full of misery. And when I came to truth, my life became full of joy. I had new lenses on my eyes. God gave me new lenses. God is love. So just the tiniest sliver of his love in my life, the world went from a black and white Charlie Chaplin, show to full, plasma screen 4D. I mean, I saw real reality. And real reality is more than facts. It's more than rocks and a pile of chemicals. It's love. The truth, the life, and the way is the Christ. He came here to help us. Don't be afraid of him. Ask questions. Keep asking questions. Whatever made you become an atheist was probably something that upset you. Okay, my father was a bad father, so I always thought God was a meanie. Okay, there was my weakness. Keep asking questions. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you.
If you like your worldview, if you think it's swell, if you've got some questions, ask me and I'll tell. All you got to do is ask. All you got to do is ask.